Church starts with the book of Genesis. It reveals to us God's plan for mankind. Yet Genesis can be daunting, especially given the scientific discoveries of the last few centuries. Well, that's where I come in with my new book, Genesis, a Bible study guide and commentary. Discover a thoroughly Catholic approach to this exciting and dramatic ancient narrative that is so often misunderstood. You can get the book now on the store page at AveMariaRadio.net. Check it out.
Dr. Ray Guarendi, thanks for joining me here on The Doctor Is In. This is Look Back Friday as we are ending it. Good Lord permitting, I'll see you Monday on ePerson Monday. I used to do evaluations for several Head Start programs over several years. Had a situation with one young man who was significantly hearing impaired, significantly so. I was called in not because of the hearing impairment, but because of his conduct. He was incredibly disruptive, defiant, just very hard to control. As I interviewed the parents, it became very clear their view was because life has taken away most of his hearing, that we need to accept when he gets frustrated and when he acts out and when he carries on because he's a special child. And I remember thinking the sad thing about this was that this young man's handicap, if you would want to call it that, is not so much his hearing, it's his conduct. The other kids didn't want to be near him. The other kids didn't like him. The other kids didn't want him around. What happened was because they thought he's been ripped off by life, the parents did, that we're going to really back off on putting reasonable limits and responsibility and standards on him. This was many years ago. I don't know where this young man is now. This was very long ago. I don't know, but had they not redirected their parenting, I'm thinking it would have just only become a much more difficult situation. You saw that in the Helen Keller story, remember? If you saw any of the Helen Keller story, parents allowed her very much to act with total wild abandon because they felt so bad for her and her loss of hearing and sight. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Ray Guarendi. Thanks, Andrew Kruchek. Walk with God always, please. And if you fall, get back up.
For information on Dr. Ray's presentations, books, and CDs, visit drray.com and follow him on Facebook. The Doctor Is In is a co-production of Ave Maria Radio and EWTN Radio and carried across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Spreading the splendor of truth. This is the Guadalupe Radio Network. Radio for your soul.
Hi, Julie Carrick here, host of We Sing Our Faith, sharing the music and ministry of many of today's Catholic recording artists. I am delighted to be the host of this weekly program on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central Time. Julie Carrick with We Sing Our Faith, Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock Central, here on the Guadalupe Radio Network.
Guadalupe Radio Network announces the launch of La Promesa Legacy Circle, formed to recognize and honor our dedicated donors who have made long-term commitments to the network through gifts from their estates. We invite you to join our family and allow us to be a part of your personal legacy. For more information on making a legacy gift for the benefit of the GRN and a guide to charitable estate planning, contact our friends at the Catholic Foundation at 972-661-9792 or info@catholicfoundation.com.
In a post-pandemic world, it is sometimes hard to know what to do or where to go, especially when it comes to your dental health.
I'm Dr. Kyle Eberline, a parishioner at Good Shepherd Catholic Community in Colleyville and a sponsor of the Guadalupe Radio Network. I understand the challenges today regarding your dental health. If you're in need of help or advice about your situation, you can find us at midcitiesdental.com. We have offices in Hearst and in Bedford.
Did you lose audio?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. I don't have audio. No audio. I had it, but then it's gone. I wonder, are we gonna pop up on screen here? And we might want to be careful because it might be going over. What we say. Yeah. We just. Hi, buddy. If you're listening, then you can probably hear us. Yeah. And so I just can't hear myself coming back. And so this is Back to the Father, and we welcome you to the program. We are just trying to figure out the audio issue that's going on right now. And we're just trying to figure out how we can hear ourselves back because I guess we're on, but I guess we could do it like this, but it would be nice to have audio coming back into our ears. The crack group of engineers is working on the issue as we speak. And so we had it at one point. You could hear it at one point, right, William?
Yes.
And so I guess I'm just going to go on the assumption that we are on, even though we can't hear ourselves. But this is Back to the Father. And this is a program where we talk about particular teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologica. And we do it every Friday at 1 o'clock on all the social media platforms of the Guadalupe Radio Network. And I know we are on YouTube, and we also are on, okay, there we go. Okay, I can hear myself now. Can you hear yourself now as well? Okay, I'm not sure what was going on there. So anyways, welcome. We're glad you're with us. And we are missing somebody. We're trying to figure out why Sissel didn't show up today. It certainly couldn't have been because she felt it wasn't because of trivia, but she just totally destroyed William. No offense, but last week, like 6-0, right? And so at least you won't get beat by Sissel today.
Right. Well, that's true. Yeah. Maybe by the audience.
That's one way of looking at it. Yeah. You won't be beat by Sissel. But no, Sissel has a very legitimate reason for being out today. And, I was out a couple of weeks in a row, and William and Sissel handled it. So this is going to be the all-guy Back to the Father without Sissel, but she is with her family preparing for a like a garage sale that she's doing. Mm-hmm. And so, God willing, she will be back for the next show, which I don't think will be next week. I'm not sure if we're doing a show next week or not. We're going to the Catholic Radio Conference in Birmingham. We are coming back on Friday, so technically we could do a show. I just don't know if we're going to be able to because we'll be flying back. But stay tuned, and we'll let you know if we're able to. So again, thanks to the engineers for getting everything worked out. William Crookendahl, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Just got back from fall break last week, so it was a good week break. But
you do anything or just kind of chill?
No, honestly, I did school during fall break.
Did you really?
A little bit.
Do you like school?
I will say I didn't like school for like the longest time, and then when I hit 10th grade, maybe even 9th grade, I started to enjoy it more. So yeah.
When I was in college at a school called Hendricks College in Conway, Arkansas, I remember one of the professors. And I'll never forget this. He was a Spanish professor. He said most people will come to a point in their life when they enjoy learning. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't there yet because I was like a freshman in college, and I should have enjoyed learning by that time. But it certainly hit me a little later in life. But I think a lot of it has to do, you have to find something that you love.
Yeah, it's so true.
Because if you're a lot of, particularly grade school and high school kids are forced into classes that they don't particularly have much interest in. Okay. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but you may not like chemistry or physics and that kind of thing. But then when you get to college and you get to kind of handpick the courses you're taking and the discipline that you like, then everything changes. Yeah. But for you to already have been there, that's pretty amazing. All right, so we are glad you are with us. I hope some of you are. I did send an email out about 30 minutes ago. Hopefully you got it. Hopefully you're joining us. And so William will be playing Sissel today and reading any of your comments. And if you're out there, just let us know you're there and where you are watching us from. And like I mentioned, we talk about a particular topic related to St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching in the Summa Theologica. And I decided that today we would talk about the justice and the mercy of God. And I don't know exactly why I chose this, but this morning, I'm always on Catholic Drive Time on Friday mornings, and I tune in at 6 o'clock, and I hear Adrian Fonseca, the host, talking about today being the anniversary of the dancing of the sun and the Fatima, the October 13th. And, of course, a lot of Our Lady's message was about, praying the rosary, the repenting for sins, the vision of hell that she showed the kids. And, so I think it kind of ties in to October 13th. And also, are you aware, William, of like some of the fear that people have for today? Of course, superstitious people are worried because it's Friday the 13th. Of course, we don't believe in that. But also of like the jihad, or that something was going to happen today. Have you heard about that?
I've heard of the jihad. I don't know what that is. I've heard of it. I'm not familiar with anything regarding anything like that.
But. Yeah, a lot of people are saying that there were going to be some bad stuff that happens today. Of course, it's Friday the 13th. Jihad in the Muslim religion is does happen on Fridays. I mean, that's like their day. I don't know exactly. But that's the day
of their worship. Basically.
Yeah, and I think sometimes if they stir up trouble, it's going to be on Fridays. And then, of course, we're less than a week from the bombing of Hamas, a bombing in Israel. Yeah. So there's just a lot of tension going on now. And we'll just talk about the justice and mercy of God. And I like to do something where I go into my Canva account and I put in a word and I see what is the first image that pops up. For example, justice. Okay, so I'm gonna show you the image. When I went into Canva, which is the account where I can get images and stuff like that, this is the first thing that popped up. The first image that came when I typed in the word justice, and it's like Lady Justice, the scales of justice, and so that's a pretty common one. Which I think implies that within justice there needs to be some kind of balance, right? The balance of rights, or the very classic definition of justice is giving to another that which he deserves, or what is due, right? So we're going to talk about St. Thomas Aquinas' idea of justice, and there's two different parts of the Summa that we're going to talk about. One of them is question 21. Where Thomas is in the course of talking about God. He has the attributes of God, then he talks about God's will, God's intellect, the love of God. And then in question 21, it's justice and mercy, which is interesting because he puts those together. It's not God's justice and then God's mercy. It's together. And then at the very end of the Summa, he talks about the justice and mercy of the damned. Like what? And he seems to be struggling with a lot of people thinking that a good God would not send anybody to hell forever. No demon, regardless of what you do, are you really going to be disciplined in hell forever, eternally? And so that's what he's going to get at. And then how does mercy play into that? So when I put in the word mercy, the image that popped up was this, which I find is pretty cool because you got this cool sunset scene. You got the cross representing Jesus Christ, and then these hands, it almost looks like the hands are coming up from the ground or something, right? But then this is the image that people have for mercy. So when you think of mercy, what pops into your mind? I mean, what's the if you had to come up with a definition of mercy, what would you say?
It's an interesting question. I've never really thought of how I personally would define it. I guess I would have to say it's a grace that God gives a particular individual, even though they don't deserve it. Kind of, I guess that kind of goes along with compassion. Those are kind of intermingled, but.
And it's fun to use the word compassion because that would mean like with passion, right? Compassion.
Yeah.
And Thomas is going to address that because Thomas would say, and I think, classic teaching of the church would say that God doesn't have any passions. God doesn't get angry, doesn't get sad, he doesn't get despair. He has no passions because he doesn't have a body. Now Jesus would have had passions, but God himself, as in the Blessed Trinity, would not have any passions. So, all right. So let's see. Is anybody? Do we know of anybody that's out there actually paying attention to what's going on?
I don't see any comments on YouTube so far.
No comments yet. All right. Okay. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube or X, let us know that you're out there. Again, Sissel typically sends out the emails and letting everybody know that we're there. And so I was not able to send out the second email. So many of you are probably watching this on a recorded basis, maybe later on in the week, but we are live every Friday at 1 o'clock. Okay, so the first slide here is in question 21 of the Summa, and Thomas says, whether there is justice in God. And I'm just going to kind of highlight the yellow highlighted parts. He says there are two kinds of justice. One is called commutative justice, and the other one is called distributive justice. Okay, commutative justice would be like if I sell you my car, and I sell it for $10,000, and we work out a deal, and you give me $10,000, and I give you the car, or you get hired, by us, and you get so many dollars per hour. It's just kind of like a one-on-one type of thing. And Thomas makes a point here, says this does not belong to God because there's such an inequality between man and God that it's hard for us to kind of have that relationship where it's like, God would say, okay, you do something and I'll reward you. Okay, so there isn't really commutative justice. But distributive justice, he says, has to do with the order of the universe. He gives all existing things what is proper to the condition of each. Okay, now I've never heard that as a definition of justice, where God basically says, okay, whatever you need to carry out your function in life, in justice, I have to give it to you. And I think what it would include is grace, like you said, because we can't achieve our final end if we don't have grace. Right? And so it'd be kind of like creating a bird without wings, or a fish without gills. It'd be very unjust. To not give a particular creature that which it needs in order to survive. Okay, does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Okay, so that's the first thing, and then going on to the next one. This is interesting. Have you studied Immanuel Kant?
Just like in the tiniest bit, not very much at all.
Okay, so you haven't gone to that video in your philosophy course?
Not, no,
okay.
No.
So Immanuel Kant had an interesting teaching called it's called the Copernican Revolution in philosophy. You've heard of that, right?
Yes.
So he says that rather in the traditional teaching of epistemology, of knowledge, would say that we, through our minds, we discover truth in the world, right? So we learn things by experiencing them.
Right.
Okay. We learn about
empiricism.
Empiricism would be definitely through demonstration, through experience, right?
Yes.
Kant turned around and said, no, it's not so much that our mind conforms to things, but it's the opposite. The world conforms to our mind. Okay, so, and then he also went so far as to say that like we impose what he called categories on the world. We impose time, we impose space, rather than living within time and space. And so what he did was he basically put the human being in the driver's seat of the process of knowledge. Okay, so we are actively knowing things by imposing categories on the world.
Okay,
right, which is right totally kind of like backwards from every like traditional concept of how a person knows.
Right,
and the reason I say that is it's interesting what Thomas says. I'm just going to read this paragraph because it ties into this whole thing. And now, of course, Kant lived in like the 18th century. So Aquinas would not have been familiar with Kant.
Right.
I mean, Kant lived many centuries later. But he says, truth consists in the equation of mind and thing. Okay, so a relationship between mind and thing. Now, the mind, that is the cause of the thing, is related to it as rule and measure, whereas the converse is the case with the mind that receives its knowledge from things. When, therefore, things are the measure and rule of the mind, truth consists in the equation of the mind to the thing. Okay, so the mind conforms to the thing, as happens in ourselves. For according as a thing is or is not, our thoughts or our words about it are true or false. Now get this next line. But when the mind is the rule or measure of things, truth consists in the equation of the thing to the mind. Okay, so this is exactly what Kant kind of turned things around and says that the mind is the rule of the things. But Thomas is applying this to God. Okay, just as the work of an artist is said to be true when it is in accordance with his art. So what you can read into this is that Thomas is saying basically what Kant is going to do hundreds of years later is he's making us basically into God, where we are imposing reality on the world through our mind rather than discovering a reality. So I don't know. I find this really interesting.
That's interesting.
I don't know if anybody out there is watching live and you have any experience with Immanuel Kant, but this is interesting because it comes under like justice and mercy, and I don't, I think he's saying that justice has to do with truth. Well, and he's going off and talking about truth here. So anyways, very interesting. And so now he says in the next article, can mercy be attributed to God? And I'll just read the yellow parts. He says, a person is said to be merciful as being, so to speak, sorrowful at heart, being affected with sorrow at the misery of another as though it were his own. So can you think of the last time you experienced sorrow or a time in your life when you were sorrowful about something? And does anything come to mind, or anybody out there who's listening? So, well, what is something? Typically somebody will say, well, when somebody dies, right? Okay, so you feel
that's the most common example.
Yeah, you feel sorrowful, but it's a passion, right? And we are affected by a passion. Something affects us, and then we are changed. And so Thomas is going to say that kind of mercy is not in God, because then we could change God. Like, let's say you go out and you do something really stupid and you sin, and God is like, oh, that really hurt me, I mean, gosh, I feel so sorrowful, which sometimes that is applied to Jesus, because Jesus had passions, and Jesus, I think, would have felt sorrowful, like at the abandonment of Peter or Judas, but God, as the Trinity, cannot change and cannot feel any passions, right? So it gets a little confusing, because normally you say, well, God can feel passions. Look at Jesus, right?
Right.
Okay, let me see. So he defines mercy as dispelling misery. Okay, now defects are not removed except by the perfection of some kind of goodness to bestow perfections. So Thomas is going to say here, mercy is bestowing perfection on creatures through God's goodness. It's almost like he's giving them something in order to dispel their misery, right? Which is kind of like what you were saying before. Insofar as perfections given to things by God dispels defects, it belongs to mercy. So this is not typically the way we describe, mercy. This is kind of different, right? Okay, in every work of God is there mercy and justice. And he says, mercy and truth are necessarily found in all of God's works, if mercy be taken to mean the removal of any kind of defect. For misery is opposed to happiness. Whatever is done by him in created things is done according to proper order and proportion, wherein consists the idea of justice. Thus, justice must exist in all of God's works. Now, the work of divine justice always presupposes the work of mercy and is founded thereupon, which I find really interesting, because he's saying that justice presupposes mercy. And so if God is going to create the order of the world, it's going to presuppose that God desires to relieve misery and to provide for creatures whatever is going to help them, not be miserable and fulfill their final end, you know? So does that make sense?
I think so, for the most part. I mean, yeah, I'd agree it's definitely not a, that concept that you just described is not something we really think of when we when the thought of justice or mercy comes to our mind. So it's very interesting how Aquinas here is thinking about it, whereas today we don't really think about it that way.
Yeah. Forrest says, glad to have you back, Mr. Palmer. Well, good to have you, Forrest. Thanks for being there. Let me know if all this makes sense or not, or if you have any comments about mercy and justice from St. Thomas Aquinas. So good to have you there. Anybody else who is listening or watching right now, let us know where you are. And especially since we're missing Sissel, we want to get your comments, and we're not going to have anybody to pit William up against at the end of the show with trivia. So come on, come one, come all, and participate and let us know that you are out there. I'd love to have your comments, all right? Okay, so it says here, in every work of God viewed as the primary source, there appears mercy. Okay, so every single work of God has mercy, all right? So that's kind of good to know. For this reason, does God, out of abundance of his goodness, bestow upon creatures what is due to them more bountifully than is proportionate to their deserts. All right, so he gives us more than we deserve. He gives us exactly what we need to achieve our final end, and that has to do with his mercy. All right. Let's see. Okay, now that's the first part. That's question 21, the 4 articles. Now we're going to go all the way to the end of the Summa, the very, very last question of the supplement. And now he's talking about divine justice in relation to eternal punishment. And is it inflicted upon sinners? Okay. And he says some interesting stuff here, because I have often thought that it's hard to get your head around, like, somebody being in hell eternally, especially if it's like hellfire. And it's like, I don't know exactly what hell is like, but if you're like have you ever like put your hand on a fire? I mean, or been burnt on your finger or something like that?
Not like drastically. When I was younger, I probably did some pretty dumb things that probably got me close to, burning my hand or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, not too much. No.
All right. Very good. Well, all right. So I'm going to read the yellow part here, because Thomas is trying to explain the fact that God does, in fact, punish people eternally. Okay, so he's building the case here, because I think in our modern day, people would say, gosh, that sounds really cruel that God would do that God would allow somebody to suffer endlessly for like forever with no end. So he says, since punishment is measured in 2 ways, namely according to the degree of severity and according to the length of time, the measure of punishment corresponds to the measure of fault. Okay, so if you were to get disciplined as a 5-year-old by your parents, you could either be disciplined like really fast and extremely painful, or it could be not so painful but over a long period of time, right? Like you can go in your room for an hour, or else you could get like a spanking.
Right.
Right. So
right.
One of them would be really intense but a short amount of time, and one of them would be a long time but not quite as painful. So that's what he's saying here, okay?
Okay.
And then he makes this example. He says, adultery, which is committed in a very short space of time, is not punished with a momentary penalty, even according to human laws. For sometimes a person who commits an offense in a city is rendered by his very offense worthy of being cut off entirely from the fellowship of the citizens, either by perpetual exile or even by death. So he's comparing punishment in hell to being exiled from a city where you do something really bad and they're either going to kill you or they're going to say you can no longer be in this city, right?
Right.
In order that he may become a fitting member of the state, his punishment is prolonged or curtailed. According to divine justice, sin renders a person worthy to be altogether cut off from the fellowship of God's city, and this is the effect of every sin committed against charity, which is the bond uniting the same city together. Consequently, for mortal sin, which is contrary to charity, a person is expelled forever from the fellowship of the saints and condemned to everlasting punishment. Okay, so if you commit a mortal sin, you've cut yourself off from charity, and you are now, banished from the communion of the saints, right?
Right.
Wherefore, if a man lived forever, the punishment of exile or slavery, which is pronounced by human law, would remain in him forever. Like you think about somebody who gets a life sentence in prison, okay? So basically they're saying you're going to die at some point, but as long as you're alive, you're in jail, right? So he's saying, but that's because there's an end to our life. Well, what if we lived forever in this life? A life sentence would be eternal, right?
Right.
Or sometimes you'll see somebody get these like 15 100-year terms. Have you ever seen that?
You mean like in prison?
Yeah, sentence. So they're going to be in jail for like 1,500 years.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Have you seen that?
I don't know if I've seen that. I've seen like 75 years or something like that.
Yeah, but no, I've seen. So you've never seen something that like is impossible for the person to do. You've never seen that, because let's say you commit 10 murders.
Okay,
and you might get a life sentence like on each one of them, right? Or you might get 100 years, and they will sometimes accumulate them so that you might get 1,000-year sentence.
Even though you're not going to even live anywhere near that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But I think what they're saying is the crime is so bad that we're trying to make a point here.
Right.
That, you're 18 years old, you just got sentenced to prison for 1,000 years, because saying 100 years isn't enough. Even saying life until you die isn't enough. We're trying to make a point here. Is that
they're trying to quantify it.
Yeah, you're really. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like that. God's saying, okay, that's for something where you do, you go out and murder 10 people, and that's a pretty bad offense. But he's saying this is an offense against God. This is an offense against something infinite and eternal. Right. And so the punishment has to be eternal also, right?
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it makes a little bit more sense. Okay. Wherefore, if man, those who sin venially, their punishment will be so much shorter. Okay, so he's talking about purgatory here. All right, so anybody out there, you got any comments? Got any thoughts about this? It's gonna get a little more interesting here in just a second, because he's gonna start tying in some things that you'll see. So some, I think the common excuses that people have for, certainly you wouldn't, condemn this person to hell forever, right? Okay, so, next page. We also find other reasons given by the saints why some are justly condemned to everlasting punishment for a temporal sin. One is because they sinned against an eternal good by despising eternal life. And if it be objected that some who sin mortally propose to amend their life at some time, and that these accordingly are seemingly not deserving of eternal punishment, it must be replied according to some that Gregory speaks of the will that is made manifest by the deed. For he who falls into mortal sin of his own will puts himself in a state whence he cannot be rescued except by God. Another and better answer is from the very fact that he commits a mortal sin, he places his end in a creature, and since the whole of life is directed to its end, it follows that for this very reason, he directs the whole of his life to that sin, okay? So let's go on to the next thing here. And now he's, have you ever heard the early church father Origen?
I have, yes.
Yeah, Origen had some interesting teachings, and he's going to, name Origen here, okay? So in this article, he says, whether by God's mercy, all punishment of the damned, both men and demons, comes to an end. So Origen taught that at some point, God is going to relent. God is going to say, okay, you've been in hell for, 50 years, and the punishment is enough, and now you're done, right? And so Thomas is going to argue that that's not the case. And he says, as Augustine says, Origen erred in maintaining that the demons will at length, through God's mercy, be delivered from their punishment. But this error has been condemned by the church for two reasons. First, because it is clearly contrary to the authority of Holy Writ, which is Scripture. And then he quotes Revelation 20. The devil who seduced them was cast into the pool of fire and brimstone, where both the beasts and the false prophets shall be tormented day and night forever and ever.
That's the quote that was coming to mind when I saw the when I saw the
okay. So
question.
you okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've seen that where it clearly says that the punishment
they'll
will
be in
forever
the
and
lake
ever.
of fire. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then that's at the very end of the
Mm-hmm.
Bible. I mean, I think there's only 21 chapters of Revelation. So this
I
is
think
at
so.
the very end. You know, God wants to get this in before he knows about the Bible. Okay. Secondly, because this opinion exaggerated God's mercy in one direction and depreciated in another. For it would seem equally reasonable for the good angels to remain in eternal happiness and for the wicked angels to be eternally punished. Wherefore, just as he maintained that the demons and the souls of the damned are to be delivered at length from their sufferings, so he maintained that the angels and the souls of the blessed will at length pass from their happy state to the unhappiness of this life. Okay, so I guess Origen believed that like angels in heaven can maybe come down now to earth and become human beings or something like that. He seemed to imply that like heaven maybe wasn't a permanent state and that he thought that heaven and hell, you know, were not permanent and that I think he did believe that maybe angels could be punished and their punishment would be to become human beings.
I've never heard that.
You never
before.
heard
That's
that? I think
interesting.
so. Don't quote me on it, but I'm pretty sure, and that's one of the reasons why Origen never got canonized. You know, you never talk about Saint Origen,
Right?
Because he was really good about a lot of things, but then other things he didn't get so right. Okay,
Yeah.
So so we move on to the next one here, and he says whether God's mercy suffers at least men to be punished eternally. So now he's saying, well, certainly, okay, if the demons are in hell forever, certainly not human beings. I mean, he's not gonna keep them in heaven forever, hell forever, right? Mm-hmm. Then he says, as Augustine says, some evaded the error of Origen by asserting that the demons are punished everlastingly, while holding that all men, even unbelievers, are at length set free from punishment. But this statement is altogether unreasonable. For just as the demons are obstinate in wickedness and therefore have to be punished forever, so too are the souls of men who die without charity, since death is to men what their fall was to the angels, as Damascene says. Mm-hmm. Okay, so he's once again reiterating that, yes, there is eternal punishment.
Mm-hmm. Because he's showing that they've already... humans and angels have already made a choice by the time they're well, for the angels, it's like they make a choice whether they want to be good or bad, and that's how it is forever. For humans, it's at their point of death, they have either chosen one path or they've chosen the other path. So based off of their choice, they're going one place or another. You can't, there's a certain cutoff time. By the time, that happens, you can't change your mind at that point.
Yeah, which is pretty cool because while we're still alive, we can...
Unlike the angels.
Yeah, unlike the angels.
Yeah.
Right, we're not created and then make our final decision right off the bat. We get to mess up. But I think a lot of people, myself included, are pretty lackadaisical about what exactly eternal punishment could be.
We just don't really think about it sometimes.
Yeah.
Like we go about with our life and we're busy and we don't really think about what it means.
Yeah, and imagine, if in fact this is true, and of course our faith would tell us that the happiness and damnation is eternal, and like if parents didn't tell their kids this, or you have a friend who's objectively committing mortal sins and you don't intervene and don't say, dude, you can't do this. I mean, you know what you're putting at stake here? Because I think our culture has kind of convinced us that this stuff, God probably isn't going to do this to people. I mean, he's more merciful than that.
And you see where that philosophy ends up. That people just doing whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And so now, people just do whatever they want, and that's become the consequence of it.
Yep.
But I think that's why it's good to read something like this from St. Thomas Aquinas, because this is the official teaching of the church. I mean, again, I know St. Faustina was visited by Jesus, and she wrote her diary about divine mercy. And I have not read that. Have you read any of Divine Mercy?
I may have read a little bit of it a long time ago, but I can't remember any of it now.
And again, it's long. There's a lot to it, and I don't know if
And of course, that's a private revelation, so it's not officially church teaching. I mean, St. John Paul II did canonize her. In fact, I think she was the first canonized saint of the new millennium in the year 2001 or something like that. Mm-hmm. So he obviously kind of put his stamp of approval on it, but no private revelation could ever, match, sacred scripture. Right. And that quote we just read seemed to very, very clearly say that, hell. And again, that's not to denigrate the Diary of St. Faustina, but I'm just saying it is still a private revelation.
Yes.
All right, so whether the punishment of Christians is brought to an end by the mercy of God. So now he's saying, okay, yeah, but some men will suffer eternally, but certainly not Christians. I mean, if he's
saying the secular people are one thing, but the Christians are another.
Right. We're going to make an exception for the Christians, right? Right. He says, according to Augustine, there have been some who have predicated a delivery from eternal punishment, not for all men, but only for Christians, although they stated the matter in different ways. For some said that whoever received the sacraments of faith would be immune from eternal punishment. But this is contrary to the truth, since some receive the sacraments of faith and have not faith, without which it is impossible to please God. Okay, so that argument would be, well, if somebody gets baptized, if somebody receives the Eucharist, if somebody goes to confession, right, that's enough. They're going to go to heaven.
I mean, that's the Protestant line exactly. But the problem with the argument is it takes away our free will. At that point, it's like, well, I'm baptized, I'm saved, so I can basically just go do
whatever I want.
But no, it doesn't stop at baptism. You have to live a good life, and you have to love God and keep the commandments and
persevere.
All that stuff.
Yeah.
Persevere. Yeah. It's all in the free will.
Yeah,
so you can choose.
Yeah, good point. And then he says, wherefore others said that those alone will be exempt from eternal punishment who have received the sacraments of faith and professed the Catholic faith. But against this, it would seem to be that at one time some people profess the Catholic faith and afterwards abandon it. And these are deserving not of a lesser, but of a greater punishment. So this is, I think, a knock on what would later become once saved, always saved. Because there were no Protestants in the 13th century. They didn't exist yet, right? But the Protestants are going to come along and say, we make the declaration of faith. I accept Jesus Christ as my personal Lord and Savior. And then kind of like to your point, then I'm on easy street, right? And there are many people today who believe that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But he's saying, no, in fact, it's worse. If you profess the faith and then you fall away from it, that's really bad.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of hypocritical in a certain sense.
Yeah, and then to think that, you're just great. But it's very appealing because I kind of wish it was that way.
Yeah.
I'd like to.
I think we all want to think it's that way, but it's not how it works.
So if you young guys who aren't married yet, if you on your wedding day tell your wife how much you love her, and then feel like, man, that's it. I'm going to have a great marriage the rest of my life. I told her I loved her, one time, and she knows it, and now I'm going to be a complete jerk, in our marriage. But hey, I told her. So it doesn't work in real life, right?
You got to keep working towards perfection.
So wise man there. All right. Then he says, moreover, it is clear that heresiarchs, like heretics, who renounce the Catholic faith and invent new heresies, sin more grievously than those who have conformed to some heresy from the first. And therefore some have maintained that those alone are exempt from eternal punishment who persevere to the end in the Catholic faith, however guilty they may have been in other crimes, which is interesting because now he's talking about, like, okay, I think what he means here is, let's say I commit a mortal sin, right? But I'm still practicing the Catholic faith. I'm still going to Mass. I'm receiving the Eucharist, which I shouldn't do with a mortal sin.
Right.
But I still have cut off charity. But I'm still going through the motions. But he's saying that's not good enough either, right?
That would work.
So he's knocking down all these arguments. Consequently, those who persevere in the faith until the end will not all be exempt from eternal punishment unless in the end they prove to be free from other crimes. Okay, so you cannot be in a state of mortal sin when you die. All right, so then the final one, this is kind of interesting. Whether those who perform works of mercy will be punished eternally. Okay, so what he's getting get at here is, the person who is in mortal sin, who has done something that would definitely offend God, but they're really a good person, and they're going to the soup kitchen on Saturdays, and they're helping the poor, and they're helping old ladies across the street, and they're tithing, and they're doing all this other stuff, and so all these works of mercy are being performed. So externally, you would look at them and say, that's the person who I think is going to heaven, right?
Right.
But they're not.
But there are internal things there as well. So he says, as Augustine says in the book quoted above, some have maintained that not all who have professed the Catholic faith will be freed from eternal punishment, but only those who persevere in works of mercy, although they be guilty of other crimes. But this cannot stand, because without charity, nothing can be acceptable to God, nor does anything profit unto eternal life in the absence of charity. Now it happens that certain persons persevere in works of mercy without having charity, wherefore nothing profits them to the meriting of eternal life, or to the exception from eternal punishment, as may be gathered from 1 Corinthians 13. Most evident in this, in the case of those who lay hands on other people's property, for after seizing on many things, they nevertheless spend something in the works of mercy. We must therefore conclude that all whosoever die in mortal sin, neither faith nor works of mercy will free them from eternal punishment, not even after any length of time whatever. Okay, so it doesn't matter. And also, the sola fide would say, if I have faith, I'm saved, right? So he's knocking down sola fide. He's knocking down works righteousness, where all I got to do is be a good person and help the poor, and work for pro-life efforts and try to save the unborn. Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty narrow. You know how it says in Scripture that the path to heaven is narrow and the way to perdition is wide. It's broad, yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what he's getting at.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's true.
Hey, I want to get to confession. But yeah, and I think if people read this and not just this, God's probably going to have mercy on me. When I die, I'm a good person. He's probably going to help me.
Well, you're just presuming on God's mercy in that case.
Yeah, that's another sin.
Yeah, exactly.
That's presumption.
You're adding sin on top of sin.
Yeah. So, anyways, I don't know if anybody is out there. Any comments or any?
I don't see any.
Okay, nothing on any of the social media sites. I know a couple of other people have jumped on to YouTube. So, if you're out there, let me know if any of this made sense. If you have any questions, any comments. We also, and I don't know if we can do this, if anybody wants to call in, remember in the old days, we used to get people to call in and they'd come on audibly, and James is like, how do I do that? If somebody calls in, 877-757-9424. If anybody calls in, James will work it out. He's going to be able to figure that out. So anyways, I did a lot of talking, a lot of reading. Any other thoughts or comments on any of that before we move on to some trivia questions?
Not too much. I mean, like I said before the show, I did policy debate I still do it to this day, but I started doing policy debate in 10th grade, and the first resolution, or the first topic I debated, was on prison policy, and lots of different teams were running cases on whether we should ban solitary confinement or abolish the death penalty or all of that. And there was always this constant theme that either me and my partner would bring up as a team, or that I'd hear other teams bring up against their opponents. And it would always come back to the theme of justice and mercy, and which one do they encompass each other? Should one be upheld higher than the other in this particular circumstance or this particular situation? So that's kind of where I was introduced to the whole idea and really thought about it. So I've kind of looked at it through the lens of prison policy and reform, and what punishment do we give criminals and different things like that.
Yeah, which is interesting because, of course, justice is one of the cardinal virtues. And in the second part of the Summa, Thomas spends a lot of time talking about the four cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, temperance, and fortitude. And by far, the longest section in the Summa of all. The Fortitude is quite short. It talks about martyrdom and some of the other virtues like patience and things like that. And temperance is a little bit longer because it has to do with sins of the flesh and things like that.
Yeah.
Prudence, intellectual virtue, making good the right decision and all that, applying right reason to our actions. Right. But justice is really big because it not only has to do with our interaction with fellow human beings, right. The justice that you and I owe each other as an intern and, as the executive director, or the way we treat our parents, or our parents treat us, or, the guy in the street or the person at the grocery store, but also
right.
our relationship with God.
Right.
And so every day we exercise justice 1,000 times. I mean, I tell my students when I go into class, I said, the exercise of justice is the way we treat each other. I mean, you have a decision to make, right? Everybody, how quiet are you going to be in class? Are you going to be, and also how am I going to treat you? So justice is an extremely important virtue. But now, so would in prison reform and the things that you were talking about, would the definition of mercy generally be that somebody is receiving like an advantage that they don't really deserve? Like somebody gets a life sentence for murder, but then a judge comes in and says, okay, we're going to cut it down to 20 years.
Yeah.
Does that be mercy?
Yeah, there were a lot of teams who would talk about, mandatory minimums and parole and all of those things. Yes, I think that would be right. Another big thing we talked about in policy in prison policy was rehabilitation and retribution, and which one the criminal or the guilty person deserves. Should we put them through rehabilitation, which was what a lot of teams who were focusing more on the mercy part would talk about, and then those who would talk more about justice would focus more on retribution and why these criminals deserve their punishments, whatever those are. So it was interesting to look at both of those, and that's kind of how I've always looked at it through a policy standpoint.
Yeah. And, St. Thomas Aquinas considers vengeance to be a virtue. You know that?
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Vengeance would be, like, let's say I lean across this table and I pop you in the face, and I hit you, which is totally unjust, totally uncalled for, right? And so you would seek vengeance because that was really wrong, right? Or, God forbid, somebody sets your house on fire and, somebody in your family dies. And if you don't feel angry, that's not right.
Oh, I see.
You should feel angry. I
mean,
like
a just anger.
Just anger, an anger that conforms with reason. Jesus going into the temple and throwing the chairs over because he was obviously he wasn't sinning, right? But he was angry. There was a sense of vengeance there. Why you've turned my father's house into a marketplace or whatever he said. All right, so are you ready for some trivia?
I'm ready.
Okay, and are all of our viewers out there ready for some trivia? I wanted to stick with the theme of justice, and I know that you like law and you like policy and that kind of thing. So I have like the 20 most famous Supreme Court cases of all time. Okay, so do you know a lot of these?
I better. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I've heard a lot of them.
I'll start easy and we'll see how you're doing. Okay. And then we'll get more challenging. And so, I mean, if you get 10 of these, I'd be very impressed. Okay. And you probably would do a lot better than I would have done. So I'll,
and there's no pressure because Sissel's
yeah,
here,
right,
so,
right, okay. So I think you would have probably done better than Sissel on this one. I mean, this definitely fits your skill set, and so I can criticize Sissel's because she's not here, right? And she's probably not watching either. All right, so we'll start easy. 1973, women have a constitutional right to an abortion during the first 2 trimesters.
That's easy. Roe v. Wade.
Okay, so of course we think that's all bogus, and that got overturned.
Yep.
But probably the most famous of all is Roe v. Wade. I would say likely the probably the second most famous. And you can be the judge of this. 1857, denying citizenship to African American slaves. Okay.
I've heard of this one.
Denying citizenship to African American slaves. Yeah, you've definitely heard of it. Okay.
I just don't know what they.
Okay. Does
what they titled it.
Okay. So Forrest is playing. Okay. So you are going up against Forrest. If you're still okay.
He said Fred Scott.
It's Dred Scott.
Dred Scott. Yeah.
Okay. So not Fred Scott. Dred Scott.
Yes,
so,
I remember that.
So
now. Yeah.
Forrest now has 1, and William has 1. All right. Okay. So you got a little competition
Tied,
here,
yeah.
you know. And okay. So So that's Forrest. Now the next one is, I would say, probably one of the other most famous ones. Separating black and white students in public schools is unconstitutional. 1954, a 9-0 decision.
Brown v. United States.
Brown versus Board of Education.
Gotcha.
Okay, so no, that's good enough. That's good enough. Okay, so you got that one. Okay. Let's see. Oh, Forrest said fat fingered. Okay, he meant to say Dred Scott. All right, so Brown versus Board of Education, separating black and white students in public schools is unconstitutional. All right, so the next, this is a pretty famous one. I don't know if you know the name of it, but I'll go ahead and say it, okay?
Okay.
The year 2000, okay, before you were born, of course, all these are before you were born, no recount of the 2000 presidential election was feasible in a reasonable time period. So they basically said, we're not going to have a recount of the 2000 presidential election. What was that case called?
I've heard of this one too.
Okay, so Forrest, do you want to tie up the score here?
Yeah, let's see if Forrest can get it, because I don't remember.
Okay.
It was
and it's actually like a very obvious, like when I say it, you'll say, oh, really? That's what it was called? I mean, like really obvious.
Was it Gore v. Bush?
Exactly.
Really?
Yeah. Well, it was Bush v. Gore.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So so you got that one, and now it gets a little bit more challenging now, but you're probably going to get this one. Prisoners must be advised of their rights before being questioned by police. Prisoners must be advised of their rights before being questioned by police.
Don't know if I know this one.
So if you get pulled over, you get arrested, every officer, every attorney, most people know that, so they have to read you your something rights. Okay, you ever heard that?
Forrest said Miranda.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay, Forrest, yeah. So it's called Miranda versus Arizona.
Okay.
Prisoners must be advised of their rights before being questioned by police. All right, and getting a little bit more challenging here. The law in 2003 that struck down state laws that prohibited sodomy between consenting adults. 2003 struck down state laws that prohibited sodomy between consenting adults. So this was kind of
it allowed it.
Yeah. It said that you cannot make this illegal to prohibit or make illegal sodomy between consenting adults.
I didn't know it was 2003, but I think I have heard of this ruling, and wasn't it one that Justice Clarence Thomas was wanting to overrule after the Dobbs decision? I think so. I can't remember what it was called though.
Yeah, this one's called Lawrence versus Texas. So that actually happened here in Texas.
Oh wait, maybe
Lawrence versus Texas.
Okay.
And then the next one, 2015, in your lifetime. A case in which the court held that the 14th Amendment requires states to license and recognize same-sex marriage. This is the one in 2015 that legalized so-called gay marriage. Do you remember what this one was?
I should.
It's called Obergefell versus Hodges.
Yes, that one.
Okay, Obergefell versus Hodges. Okay, so let's see. These you probably won't get these, so I'll just tell them. 1967, Loving versus Virginia invalidated state laws prohibiting interracial marriage. Okay, and then this one would apply very much to people your age. Regents of the University of California versus Backey, 1978, upheld use of race as one of many factors in college admissions. So colleges could take into account, you going up against somebody equally merited, and then they could take into consideration the race of a person in admissions. So you might not get it, but somebody else does.
Okay.
All All right. Well, that just about does it. And thanks, everybody, for watching. And if you're watching this on a recorded basis on any of the platforms of social media for the Guadalupe Radio Network, and if you would like to join our email list, all you got to do is email back to the Father at grnonline.com. Back to the Father at grnonline.com. We do this every Friday at 1 o'clock. And again, next Friday, we'll be flying in from Birmingham, Alabama in the morning from the Catholic Radio Conference. And so I don't know yet if we're going to do a show, but definitely in 2 weeks we'll be here, but we will certainly let you know. And again, if you'd like to be on the email list and get updates on the program, just email back to the Father at grnonline.com. Thank you very much to James Jacoby for running the board flawlessly, and thank you, William, for being part of the program. Thank you all for watching. God bless you. Have a good weekend. So we had one viewer.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.